Hello, and welcome to a uh, a messed up version of Atlas information. I am your host, far too zoomed in, so I'm gonna stop my camera just for a moment and see if I can do something about that. Hang on one moment. Okay. Nope, it's still not working. So, this is apropos given today's topic. We're going to be talking about privacy. And of course, in this day and age, everybody's worried about all of these different cameras and whatnot pointed at us 24 hours a day. So let's see if we can't. Let's try this. How's that? Is that it? Is that better? Is that no? That's too much. Okay. Let's work with that. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and I'm more appropriately sized now, I think. So today, as I mentioned, and as was described in the description to today's video, we are dealing with this question of privacy and issues around privacy, and how this is seemingly a major concern in today's society. And it has become a concern way back when George Orwell wrote his dystopian novel 1984. I suppose you might say that's when privacy, as we understand it, as the modern contemporary issue that it is, the social, political issue, and personal issue, I guess. It was Orwell's, what we now call Orwellian nightmare, his Orwellian dystopian view of the future with a totalitarian regime that watches everybody. Now, Orwell had his reasons for writing his book because the 20th century was filled with regimes that did just this. Totalitarian regimes who seek total control, total dominance, and control over the populace need to know what the populace is doing. And they want to know what the people are talking about, or more importantly, whispering about in the shadows. And people in power, regimes of power, have always sought to uncover the secrets, the esoteric knowledge, if you will, the hidden knowledge. So you will often find in cultures throughout history and across the world, cultures which had multiple levels of engagement. They had a surface level outward culture, but then beneath that there was this hidden secret culture which existed beneath the surface. And this often was reflected in the personalities and the individual cultures of individuals. So in Japan, for instance, there's a long tradition of what they call the outer self and the inner self. The outer self is that person, that personality and pleasantries and public, professional, courteous, polite interactions and behaviors and conversations that you have with people in society based on established norms, agreed upon principles, shared ideology, shared values. And this is all well and good. It creates a very orderly society, again, on the surface. And in a society like that, particularly Japan, there is tremendous value placed on the inner world and protecting that inner world from being exposed publicly. In other words, the inner world is a matter of privacy. It is the intimate world. It is to be shared only with those whom we are most intimate. And there is some variation on that according to individuals and, let's say, the dynamic of their family, for instance, and their friendships, just how much or how little of their private internal self they reveal. Now, of course, when you're talking intimate partners and close friends, there's going to be some sharing there of that intimate secret self, that private self that you keep hidden from the rest of the world, from proper society and from your workplace and your coworkers and your boss, your teachers, perhaps most of your colleagues and fellow students, or whatever areas in life, in society that you travel, there's this wall, there's this separation, a divider. And people who you let in to your life, into your intimate circles, you then share more of what's on the other side of that wall, what's inside of your compound or inside of your temple with them, because you're inviting them into your home, you're inviting them into your life. And the more they earn your trust and the more they open up to you and the more that relationship develops, the more comfortable you are with sharing those inner secrets. So, from a cultural perspective, we can understand that even in a non-spiritual context, in just a secular cultural context, there is this natural divide between what is public and what is private. If we take that another step deeper within ourselves, related to the path, then there are depths and levels of that internal world. So a moment ago, I described it as a compound or a temple. So all temples are constructed, designed and constructed, built in such a way where there's the exterior of the temple. So the temple can be admired and wondered at from afar, from outside, with a sort of open invitation. Not always, but often an open invitation, a cause of curiosity, of intrigue. What goes on in there? What do they do in there? It's a very different looking building. Generally speaking, temples tend to have a unique appearance on the landscape. And when you first enter into a temple, you enter into what is known as essentially the first chamber. This is the public level of the temple. So, for instance, in a Catholic church or any sort of Christian denomination church, you enter into the church when there is no mass. And if there's no mass, you're just looking at the interior of the church. That is the public level. It's not the best of examples, the Christian church, because of course anyone from the public, the general public, is allowed to go into the mass and partake in the mass. But the second half of the mass, where you receive the Holy Unction, also known as the Eucharist, that is reserved exclusively for those who have been baptized and who have received the sacrament of First Communion and confession. So there are steps, there are initiations which must be earned in order to get deeper into the temple and have access to the deeper mysteries, to partake in the more occult activities, rites and rituals, and to gain access to the most intimate secrets of the faith of that particular religion. And so temples have always been constructed this way, where there's an outer chamber or first chamber, and then inner chambers, second chamber, third chamber, and so on. And each chamber leads deeper into the mysteries and closer to the ultimate mystery. This is symbolic, of course, of the initiations that we undergo in the supernal worlds. This tradition of multi-level, multi-chambered temples is as below as it is above. And it is a tradition which comes directly from the supernal worlds, because temples in the supernal worlds are laid out this way. This is a universal archetype. And whether you look at the layers of an onion, or you look at the hierarchical arrangements around centers of galaxies and the orbits around, even in a solar system, the orbits around the sun, or even the nucleus of an atom. And when you talk about an atom and electron structures, the orbits of electrons, the nucleus is in the center, and then you have these electron shells. Really, they're just really probability wave functions, but the negative energy is oriented in different layers around the nucleus. And the implication is that the knowledge, and knowledge is power, the knowledge grows, near exponentially the further and deeper you go into the temple. Now, practically speaking, when we're talking about a religion, that's not the case. But when we're referring to the supernal worlds, the levels of being and the levels of initiation, could very well be that the knowledge and wisdom afforded to initiates in each chamber the activities, the rites, and the rituals that they are allowed to partake in represent a significant step up that is orders of magnitude greater than where they were in the previous chamber, in the previous level. And because of this, there is a long standing tradition among mystery schools to restrict access to those inner levels, second chamber, third chamber, or even entry to the temple. There are religions, there are traditions and schools, including Gnostic schools, where, and secret societies and the Masons, where you might be able to enter the physical building, but you can't partake in any first chamber activities unless you have requested to be there and received permission, or you have explicitly been invited to attend. And then, of course, you can go and attend. Even in Buddhism, the practice of Buddhism is open to all, but there are secrets, there are secret practices, advanced practices, practices that avail an initiate of that tradition greater knowledge and, by extension, potentially greater power, power which can be used for good or for ill, as is the case with all forms of power. Any tool can be used constructively or destructively. And because of this, even Buddhism reserves the right to withhold information and reveal that only to its sworn, devoted monks, individuals who have taken a vow, and several vows, including vows of celibacy, vows of fealty, of loyalty, of devotion, of dedication, of sobriety, and who knows what other commitments and dedications and devotions that an initiate choosing to enter into the life of a monk, of a Buddhist monk. There are different schools of Buddhism. For example, Tibetan Buddhism comes to mind. And most certainly, there are different schools of Tibetan Buddhism. And there may be unique promises that must be made to enter into any particular temple in any particular part of the world. But the universal archetype is present and is in all of them. And it's also in the Catholic Church, it's in the Jewish faith, and it's in Islam. It's someone wishing to become a priest or a nun or a Franciscan friar, a brother, or an imam, right, or a rabbi, right? These levels, these are vocations, but they are levels of lived understanding of those particular traditions, of those religions. And in order to be able to be a living embodiment of the principles associated with those levels, one must make a commitment. One must demonstrate one's worthiness to receive that information. And it is no different between ourselves and our higher self, and between our higher self and the cosmic Christ, the being of beings, the Logos. We are on this journey, we are on a path, the alm of life, advancing levels or seeking to advance levels in order to be able to enter deeper into the mysteries, deeper into the temple of our own being and the being of beings, closer and closer to the Holy of Holies, which is the innermost of innermost chambers, the most secret of secret chambers, and the most guarded and protected of secrets. The Holy of Holies was the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant, which was the most powerful artifact to the Hebrews. But the Ark of the Covenant is also symbolic of that place inside of us and on the tree of life known as Da'at, known as Gnosis, because knowledge is power. And the necessity to be worthy of access to such knowledge is reflected in the modern legend out of Ethiopia, where it is said, certainly many Ethiopians believe, that there is a church in Ethiopia where the Ark of the Covenant exists to this day, that it is the final resting place of the Ark, and that there are a class of priests who alone are able to be the caretakers of the Ark. But one of the side effects of doing so is they develop, I believe it's terrible cataracts, and they all end up going blind. And that if you're not worthy, if you try to gaze upon the Ark without being of pure spirit, then you will die, because you're not worthy, and you're just so overwhelmed by the power emanating from the Ark that you're not worthy of it. You're not worthy to even be in its vicinity. And this is reflected somewhat in the scriptures as well, which describes the Ark as though it contained a tremendous amount of energy, or was this like powerful energy weapon, right? It crumbled the walls of Jericho, for instance, right? It parted the Red Sea, and it decimated entire armies. And we saw, that a Hollywood version of that, I guess, to some degree in the Ten Commandments, but instead in the Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. In that first movie, we saw a Hollywoodized version of the power of God emanating from the Ark, and that all who are not worthy, who gaze upon it, are smited, are smote. God smites them because they are unworthy to gaze upon the perfection. So, why do I begin a talk on privacy with all of this background? Because all of this is to try to establish that there is a precedent esoterically for secrecy. that secret knowledge, hidden knowledge, there's a reason behind it. And that we have idioms like, do not cast pearls before swine. We have these cliches for a reason. You you don't share that intimate self of yours with just anybody. And there are certain experiences perhaps that you've had on your journey, or interactions that you've had with your higher self or your divine mother, which were for you and for you alone. It is generally considered a faux pas in esoteric schools to discuss our experiences in casual conversation, if you will. It's because it very quickly devolves into a kind of not it's not necessarily boasting, right? But it, if you get a number of different aspirants together, or even one-on-one, two aspirants, and each has a kind of alpha personality, then as they share intimate knowledge about their spiritual experiences or their path, very often you can observe, and perhaps you've actually experienced this yourself, individuals in pairs or in groups, they start falling into this game of one-upmanship, where if you're in a small group of spiritual aspirants, and let's say the topic of astral projection comes up and astral travels, and one says, oh yes, and I did this in the astral plane, and I did that in the astral plane, and I met master so and so, and I met archangel such and such, and he took me on a tour of this place, and I went here and I saw this, and right, it very quickly, if you pay close attention, it kind of takes on a boasting type energy. Like it has an air of boasting about it, of I'm such a good Gnostic, or I'm such a good whatever, or I'm so special, or doesn't that sound amazing, what I just told you about where I went and what I did and how it felt and all this stuff, right? So the others, in hearing that, they say, oh well, of course, I traveled in the astral plane too, and I didn't go here and there where you went. No, I went over here and I went over there and I did this and I did that, and I spoke with this archangel, a different archangel, and and I went to the Akashic records and I looked back in time and I did. And then the third person hears that and says, oh, well, that's nothing. I went and traveled to other planets and I spoke with different humanities and I studied with their masters. And the fourth person says, oh, hey, that's nothing. I went all the way to Master Oremus at the heart of the galaxy. And it just goes around and around and around. And it's just like this game of tag, this game of merry-go-round, where everybody's trying to one up one another and sort of show, or not get left. First, it starts off like you don't want to be left out. You don't want to seem like you're the only one who hasn't had spiritual experiences. But it's, as Benjamin says here, it soon turns into a game of boasting. It's very similar to what you see happen when you're at a dinner party or somewhere and people gather around the bar or the buffet or whatever, and they start chit-chatting and sharing stories about their vacations, about their holidays. And maybe a group of them, a small handful, all went to the same place. Maybe they all went to Greece, or they all went to Disney World, or they all went to China or Africa, or it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And a small group of them who all went on this trip to the same place, right? They all start recalling and regaling the tales of how great their trip was and what they saw and what they didn't get to see because they went to Disney World. Oh, but this ride was closed that day. And then the other person says, "Oh no, it was working when we went." So you see, there's this, and when we engage in that kind of, call it what it is, boasting and puffing ourselves up or trying to belong, we are sharing. When we're talking about, now I'm not talking about trips to Disney World now. I'm talking about trips in the astral plane or other spiritual experiences, intimate experiences that were for our benefit and ours alone. When we engage and use those experiences in casual conversation to puff ourselves up, to make ourselves feel more important or seem more important, or to be able to fit into the group, we are diminishing, first of all, we're diminishing the sacredness of those experiences. But perhaps most importantly, we are hijacking them. We are laying claim as though those experiences were as a result of our specialness or ability or knowledge or wisdom, or right. But the truth is, we didn't do much of anything to have any of these spiritual experiences that we've had. If you count experiences that you've had taking substances, or experiences that you've had in the midst of meditation, then sure, you can say that you are responsible in part for having those experiences, but only in part, and it's a very small part, because you cannot induce spiritual experience from this side. That would be like someone on the outside of a temple or a church trying to force their way not only inside the temple but into the second chamber, and then take credit for what is going on in there when they're an outsider. The temple is drawing them in, and perhaps those who are already members, or indeed those who are facilitators or monks or priests, or ranking members in the hierarchy of that particular temple, of that particular congregation and community, they can invite and instruct and evaluate, and then allow for the initiate to progress into the further, deeper chambers, the higher chambers, depending on your point of view. But the initiate does not induce that process. We are meant to be a human being done. We are taken along for the ride. We may have to indicate our willingness to go on the ride, and we may have to make sacrifices of our time and effort and energy. We may, in the case of meditation, have to set aside time and set aside the rest of our life during that time and focus our consciousness and allow the mind to take a break. And if it can't, if it's just, doing its crazy thing, we just observe it. In other words, there are things that we can do to prepare ourselves for and to demonstrate, and not just demonstrate, but actualize our preparedness for whatever it is that we are meant to receive through whatever experience. But we cannot induce the experience from our side. Because even if you take psychedelics, you cannot tell the substance, you cannot tell the psychedelic what sort of experience you want to have. I mean, you can tell it. You can tell Mother Ayahuasca what you want her to show you. And she may or may not show it to you. Or she may show you something completely different. And that's why people who take psychedelics report having good trips and bad trips. And they report having trips that are completely out of left fields, things that they could never have imagined nor expected, let alone induced. That's important to remember from that particular perspective. So the notion or the idea that people boast about their experiences as if they were my experiences, I had these experiences, I made these experiences happen. No. No, these experiences were done to you. They were shown to you. You had very little to do with any of that. So to boast about it is a non-starter. So there's that aspect of withholding information and keeping things private and personal. The other thing too is that this whole notion of exposing yourself, and that knowledge is power, and if you have a great many secrets that you publish to the world, you put online and you publish to the world, you are essentially opening yourself up to all forms of attack, because now you've essentially been handing out keys in for others to come and make intimate sojourns into your life. You're opening yourself up to attack, basically. And you're opening yourself up to others trying to take advantage of this intimate knowledge, because very often secret knowledge, secrets that you carry about yourself, about your inner psychology, your inner world, maybe your childhood, or your, we talked last week about fear. So you might have many fears about secret fears, perhaps from your childhood, or phobias, or bugaboos or anxieties or whatever, and you don't tell anybody these, that you just keep them to yourself, because you know that if someone were to find out your secret fears, they might be able to exploit that, because it's a weakness, right? So many people will take that route and like follow the Japanese and the Victorian British style of cultural construct, where they have this constructed outer public self, and then inside, they have their, and some people, psychologists even call this often your inner child. So you hide all of your weaknesses and you store them away deep in some hidden secret chamber inside of you, because you know that knowledge is power, and if knowledge of your weaknesses can empower your enemies, those who wish to do you harm will likely be able to harm you that much more easily if they have the keys to your greatest fears and your greatest weaknesses. So there is a practical precedent that has existed in humanity and in psychology and in human relations, interaction, community, and congregations for countless millennia. This is where privacy was born. This is the foundation of privacy. It's secrecy. It's not secrecy for secrecy's sake. And it's also not secrecy necessarily out of fear. But there's a balance, there's a practical aspect to secrecy. And I don't know if you happen to see on Friday, I guess it was. Yeah, I think it was Friday. There were these hearings on Capitol Hill, the UFO UAP disclosure hearings. And they had these professionals testifying. And the Congress people on the committee, they were asking them tough questions about disclosure and about, why don't you think the American people are ready to hear this, when it's literally been like 100 years of pop culture and books and speculative books and conspiracy theories, plus our own space race, talking about not just extraterrestrials, but also advanced vehicles, interdimensional travel, faster than light travel, vehicles that defy all laws of motion, all laws of gravity. So these are all ideas and concepts that are well held in the collective consciousness of the public around the world. Why is it still a secret? Why does the government or a certain contingency inside of the government, let's call it national defense interests, or let's call it the shadow government, or you can call it whatever you want, but there's a contingency, a contingent of a cabal who are hoarding not just information, but actual technologies, actual recovered technologies. And they refuse to reveal what those are to the world. Now, they will cite national security concerns, because knowledge is power. And you don't want necessarily to go and start openly sharing with the world schematics and blueprints and secret NASA research and reverse engineering of technology, which could empower your enemies and adversaries with capabilities that are orders of magnitude greater than what they currently possess. I mean, there's an argument to be had there. But to play this coy game of denial, which is just ridiculous at this point, and just to patronize and treat the public like basically like they're idiots, um, seems to me like it's it's too far on the other direction, right? Like the somewhere between complete full disclosure and putting all the schematics on the internet for anybody in the world, including any terrorist organization, to get their hands on a interdimensional anti-gravity vehicle that can defy the laws of physics. In between that on one side and what we have today, which is disclosing nothing out of fear, and inciting national defense, that we can't even say anything because heaven forbid, right? Somebody, the public knew that there were beings from other worlds visiting us or whatever. There's some sort of balance in the medium. So again, secrecy is a prudent and practical practice. And and Gnostics had to be secret about their practices for centuries, probably more like millennia, because the early Gnostics were burned at the stake as heretics. So Gnosticism had to go underground. Esotericism, occultism, it had to go around and underground, and it had to survive in secret societies, because the public face of Christianity, the Catholic Church, was fervent, and it was relentless in its pursuit of heresy and stamping out anything that it saw as a threat to its dominance. And it is not the only religion to behave in that way, but there are different forms of militancy. Islam doesn't use the word heretic, it uses the word infidel. So there are many people living in Islamic states who have to keep their true beliefs hidden from the state, from their family, from their imam, because they want to outwardly appear like they're toting the party line and that they're along for the ride like everybody else, but maybe secretly they don't adhere to certain tenets of whichever particular sect of Islam. Whether it be Sunni or Shia, like maybe their family belongs to a more radical or radicalized sect of that religion, and they have to quietly endure while secretly in private they practice a very different flavor of Islam, but one that is very personal and intimate between them and their higher self, their individuated essence of Allah in this case. Benjamin says, I was just watching a video on disclosure. I agree the fear of the government is the pillars of power will fall. And the guy said he was making an effort to create a government-like organization to dialogue peacefully with aliens. There are many people who are taking, steps to arrange for disclosure around the government, the gatekeepers there. But this talk is not about alien disclosure and UFOs and UAPs. I was only using that as an example to illustrate that there are practical reasons for secrecy. And I juxtaposed, yeah. So I was using the UAP example and the Gnostic example to show two cases where different groups, for different reasons, but they were reasons of security, reasons of practical security, they had to keep hidden knowledge hidden from everybody else. They had to keep their secrets because the world wasn't ready. Like the Europe wasn't ready. Catholic Church wasn't ready to face the truth that the Gnostics had to share. And when they tried to share them, they ended up burned at the stake or with their heads chopped off or whatever vindictive, arduous forms of torture that some overzealous bishop decided to subject them to. Now that's all well and good, and it's important to get that out on the table, right? So where does that leave privacy? Does that mean that all the concerns that people have over privacy today, that they're all completely valid? And that privacy, like if I just spent almost an hour talking about the importance of secrecy and the historical, societal, cultural, occult, esoteric importance of maintaining secrecy, of not casting pearls before swine, etc., and the different chambers of the temple, and that not to expose certain secrets to those who have not demonstrated their worthiness to receive said secrets. I spent an hour going over all of that. So isn't privacy just protecting secrets? Isn't it the same thing? Isn't privacy just secrecy? Privacy, there are different types of secrets. Let's start there. There are the secrets you don't want others to know, in part because of the second and third order consequences which might unfold were those others who are unworthy were to misuse and abuse the power that knowing certain secrets would give them. Right? That's the kind of secrecy that secret societies and esoteric schools and Gnostics practice. It's the kind of secrecy that a parent and a gun owner practices when he locks up his firearms and he hides the key to the ammunition drawer. He keeps the location or the combination on the ammunition drawer a secret. because as a parent of young children, he knows that the temptation to go and play with those firearms when they are alone in the house or when they're not being supervised, the temptation is too great. And even if they're not young children, but they're teenage children, and they're prone to fits of depression or anxiety or emotional outbursts or, you know, and heaven forbid, they have had thoughts of self-deletion, to use the correct uh, term, the term that the YouTube algorithms find more pleasing, because the term suicidal thoughts is apparently too jarring and triggering nowadays. So we have to talk about young people having thoughts of self-deletion. It's crazy euphemistic language. So the parent knows that it is safer for security reasons, or that if someone were to enter into their home, and home invasions are a thing in the United States, if someone were to enter into the home and the guns were openly displayed and the ammunition was in unlocked drawers right next to them, right? Then the home invader would be handed their own extended arsenal with which to wreak havoc, not just on that home, but maybe elsewhere in the neighborhood. So to keep material of that nature under lock and key, and to keep access to that material secret and private, right? It makes a great deal of sense because of the second and third order consequences. But then there are other secrets. Secrets that have nothing to do with second or third order consequences. Secrets that are just perhaps things that we do, behaviors that we have that we're not particularly proud of. They're not necessarily dangerous, but we don't want others to know about them. Maybe because we're ashamed. In fact, the whole reason why this humanity wears clothes is because we're ashamed. We other humanities, enlightened humanities in the cosmos, generally speaking, they don't wear clothes. They have no need for clothes because they have no shame. They're not ashamed when they look at one another. Now, there may also be significant physiological differences between ourselves and themselves. But wearing clothing, I mean, Gurdjieff talked about this in his book, Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. Gurdjieff has his character, Beelzebub, go off on this rant, on this like tirade at length, berating the three-brained beings on planet Earth and their ridiculous custom of wearing clothing, and how he asserts to his grandson how he is certain how his grandson is going to find this strange and bizarre and almost uniquely earthling custom of wearing clothing very amusing. That his grandson will probably think that we are all clowns. We're all, in this giant pantomime, and we're all wearing costumes. Because we're covering our private parts. Now, someone might say, well, that comes with modesty. It's modesty. That's why we wear clothing. It's not shame, it's modesty. Because you can go to a nudist colony, you can go to a nudist beach, and there are people, they don't wear clothes, right? And to the so-called normies or everybody else, we look upon a nudist colony and we say, those are freaks. They're weird. They have no modesty. Do they not have any modesty? Do they not have any decency? That's another word that we like to throw around and use to justify and rationalize why we are covering up our privates, the parts of us related to intimacy, the intimate parts of us that we only show under certain circumstances and only to the most special people in our lives and or those whom we trust implicitly. For example, medical staff, doctors, and so on, who, of course, in the course of doing their art, healing us, they need to be able to examine us and so on. So I don't need to explain that any further. That's self-evident. But that's perhaps the most obvious and in some ways reductionist, but really foundational level of this phenomenon of privacy. Because let's be honest, you have private parts, I have private parts, everybody has private parts. It's not a secret. None of us are hiding any secrets under our clothes, right? So privacy does not equate to secrecy. Secrecy is withholding information, knowledge, something potentially dangerous, something that can have second and third order consequences that are unforeseen and uncalculable, unknowable. But those who have the secret kept from them, they don't know what is being kept secret, what is being kept hidden. They can speculate, they can theorize. They might have all kinds of ideas and concepts in their head, and they can also theorize why we are keeping it secret. Like in the case of disclosure, right? But that's not privacy. That's secrecy. Privacy is what you do when you're alone and nobody's around to see, nobody's around watching. What do you do and what you do, and when you do things that you would never do if people were around. Why not? In other words, privacy are the things you have to hide for fear of what that knowledge, how it might come back to haunt you, what others might think of you. That's privacy. And the big bugaboo around privacy these days is online privacy. The websites you go to, the web searches you make, and that somehow in the act of doing web searches, your personal information is making its way through data brokers. It's your personal information, your browsing history, and so on and so forth, is being sold to third parties who are using that information to then do what? Mostly to try to sell to you, mostly to try to get to you. And this is a blown up into this huge issue, this huge scandal, right? That these companies are buying your personal browsing data. And my question is, like, what do you have to hide? I'll give you an example that actually inspired today's talk. I was charged by my father to look into gutter guards. You know, the eavesdropping around the house where the water runs down into the ground. Eavesdropping, also known as gutters. Now, after many years, it's been 25 years we've been in this house, all the little gravel from the shingles has created like a good inch worth of sediment in the bottom of the gutters. We really should have been cleaning them on a more regular basis, but it's a rather awkward roof to do, and I guess we just never thought of it. It was never a problem, and it's not like it's really a problem now. Only the trees have now grown. The trees are all mature, and now pine needles and all kinds of stuff are falling into the gutter. So, well, I was charged with the task of doing research into gutter guards. Well, first into cleaning them out, and then I realized, well, if you get a set of gutter guards for your gutters, they clean them out before they install the gutter guards. So maybe it makes more sense to get gutter guards because you get the cleaning included. And then you have presumably the protection that you don't have to pay for cleaning in the future, or at least perhaps not so much. So, as you can imagine, I did what most people do, and I went to Google and I looked up, gutter guards, Ontario, Canada, whatever. And up came some sponsored links and some others. And I was looking into them and I looked at some, and then I contacted a couple of them, one for cleaning and one for installation. And then I decided to take a break and just check Facebook. And within moments, my Facebook feed was filled with advertisements for gutter guards and leaf-proof gutters. And these were the names of companies and solutions that hadn't shown up on my Google search, but now they were here on Facebook. Now, how did Facebook know that I was in the market for gutter guards? Well, because Google told them, or rather, Facebook bought that information from Google. And not because anybody, anywhere, in any office, not because any human eyeballs saw my name associated with gutters and said, oh, well, we better send him ads for gutter guard. No, this is all completely automated. It's just the machine. It's just happening in the background. And maybe it wasn't Google that sent him the information. Maybe it was Microsoft. Maybe it was capturing the information on the level of Windows 11 on this new computer. But when they ask you about cookies, right? That's what an adorable name, cookies. We use cookies. Do you want cookies? Tell us which cookies you want and which cookies you don't. It's like only a cold-hearted, machine-oriented, uh, technology type of person is going to say, "Well, let's see. It's actually it's basically like spying technology. What are we going? Oh, I know. Everybody likes cookies." So there might be some innocuous, like nerdy reason why they named them cookies, and maybe like 30 years ago or 20 years ago in Palo Alto or what in California, some nerd somewhere, he just couldn't think of a better name. Um, or the Girl Guide just happened to be going past the office selling Girl Guide cookies that day. Who knows? The point is, they use these cookies to capture our our data. But in my case, I started going through my Facebook feed and I started clicking on the links because hey, I'm in the market for gutter guards. I'm looking for information. I'm looking for the best solution. And now all of a sudden, all of these options were appearing for me that didn't appear on the Google search or the research that I was trying to do on my own. So now here they are. Did I feel violated? Was my privacy under threat? Was my privacy compromised by third parties who wanted to do me harm or something? No. They have gutter guards or complete home eavesdropping solutions, and I'm an individual in the market for those solutions. Is that like, should I be offended? Should I be upset? Should I be what's the word? Um, outraged? Offended? Why? Why? It was a valuable service. And in fact, I clicked on one of them and they took me right to a page where I could set up an appointment for an appraisal. And a very kind, kindly young man came yesterday, did his appraisal, gave my father and I a full presentation, showed us the product, and we were very impressed. And in fact, we never even considered that as a possible option or possible solution because it never, like I said, it never appeared on my Google search. I didn't even realize such a technology existed as the one that he was offering. Had Google and Facebook not violated my privacy, I would never have had access to that presentation and that information. I would not know the existence of this potentially superior solution. I have other people still coming to show me their offerings, so I have multiple estimates now lined up. In other words, the choice that I have to choose from, the pool of options that I have to choose from grew. It doubled literally in a matter of moments simply because somebody somewhere, some data broker, some middleman and their automated system took my Google search and sold it to Facebook. And then Facebook put companies in my feed because of that information. And it was information that happened to be very valuable to me in the moment. And as I was contemplating all of this and all of the um, outrage over privacy and these big issues that people make of it. It's like, well, what are you doing? What do you have to hide? On the one hand, and on the second hand, with the example that I experienced this week, it's like I'm much better off because somebody was, quote, invading my privacy and watching everything that I was doing and everything that I was searching. I personally don't search for, improvised weapons of the American underground, right? Which is a real publication, by the way. It's a public domain document that has been around since the 1960s. It is a manual in the public domain for how to equip an armed insurrection. So there are, in that book, you will find detailed schematics and step-by-step instructions on how to make a pipe bomb and how to make C4 and how to make a fully functional submachine gun out of sheet metal, plumbing parts, and other things that you can buy at your local hardware store. So you might ask me, how do I know that such a book exists? Well, let's just say that one crossed my path a long, long time ago when I was just still a teenager, still a child, really. There was a time when, Rambo and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Stallone movies, like those action movies in the 80s, they were a big deal. And so being a soldier of fortune was all the rage. There actually was this magazine called Soldier of Fortune magazine. So it was at that time that this book crossed my path. You might still be able to get a copy at an Army surplus store, but certainly you can find it online. But if you do, just keep in mind that you might be flagged, because what need you of a manual on how to equip an armed insurrection, right? Or what else is it that you're doing online? What other information are you looking for that you don't want others to know? Now, if you're looking for information about how your government is corrupt and you don't want to know the very government who's spying on you to know that you're spying on them, well, that starts to make a little bit more sense. But companies don't care, right? Companies are looking for keywords. And if you're looking for something and there's somebody out there on the internet who has the thing that you're looking for, why would it bother you that there's a whole mechanism between you and them that is going to try to get the two of you together in order to make the exchange? Because if you can make the exchange, the person who made the connection will get their cut. This has been a tradition in business since time immemorial, right? It's called brokers, people who broker deals. We call them real estate brokers, right? They get a commission for selling houses, right? Finding buyers. You have a house to sell, but you're too busy. You have a life and a family and everything else. Like you can't spend the time to sell your home. So you hire an agent. So agency, brokers, brokerages, et cetera, these serve a practical purpose. And it would be in something as colossal and as convoluted and complicated and global as the World Wide Web, it is frankly naive to think that something like that could really function and work without middlemen and brokers and agents. It's just that the agents are not alive. They're mechanical agents. They're algorithms. They're bots. They're cookies. They're automated agents. They're automated brokers and brokerages. And they're constantly scanning the activity online, looking for keywords that can potentially match buyers to sellers, because then they get their little commission, their little cut from that interaction. So privacy then, right? When you think about the outrage about privacy, is that the internet is also used in ways that really people do want to get access to certain information or certain materials, certain experiences, visual or otherwise. But deep down, they can't really be proud of what they're doing. Or at least they don't want it to come to light. They don't want it to get out there somehow. And that's where the issues of privacy come in. It all goes back to that question of modesty. But we confuse it with secrecy, right? Because we all have our secrets. We all know that there are things that we do in private that we want to keep to ourselves. But the internet allows for us to indulge those otherwise private desires, behaviors, in an expanded and extended way. The problem is that we want to be able to use that vehicle, but not deal with the consequences of the fact that that vehicle is, by definition, a public forum. Privacy, then, secrecy is something that is important even on an esoteric level, on a being level. That's why I spent that hour explaining all of that. That secrecy has a foundation which is not egoic, in other words. Privacy, however, its foundations are egoic. Privacy is protection of the ego self and that which we are ashamed of, that which we do not want others to know for fear of what they will think of us and what they will say about us. Fear of what they will do to us, that now starts moving away from privacy and back into secrecy. Right? In the same way that the Gnostics had to be practical because they were being burned at the stake. They could not disclose their spirituality publicly because the overzealous bishop, right, would have them burned at the stake or burned as witches or burned as whatever, right? So it was completely impractical. It was very prudent for them to withhold that information. In other words, to practice secrecy. But those same Gnostics did not go around the village beating their chest, demanding their privacy, and demanding their right to their privacy. No, they just practiced secrecy. And the more low key they could remain, the better. The more under the radar, they didn't call attention to themselves because that's counterproductive. But isn't it interesting that the privacy advocates are often the loudest? And they're drawing all this attention to themselves and how important privacy is to them and how they're champions of privacy. It's like, well, yeah, okay, but what do you have to hide? Because if it was really that important to you, then you would just go about your business quietly under the radar in secret, doing what you do in secret. You wouldn't be out in public demanding that the world accommodate the fact that you have secrets that you don't want others to know. And that you demand your privacy be respected. It's a very strange phenomenon, but it arguably falls into the category of the best defense is a good offense. And as I was describing last week when we were talking about fear, many who are most afraid and they're concerned about their comfort and security, they go on the offensive and they seek control. And they want to establish a border, a heavily armed, heavily defended border around themselves and around their life, so that they can feel comfortable and secure inside of that bastion, inside of that keep, that castle, that fortress that they construct around themselves. And it's a fortress of control. It's a fortress of dominance. If you've ever seen a medieval castle or a revolutionary fort here in North America, or even elsewhere around the world, like a fortification of a walled city, like earlier we mentioned just briefly the walls of Jericho. How might have the walls of Jericho appeared to the peasants or even a young soldier at the time? They're terribly imposing. That's why we have that word. When you're walking up to a castle, these huge walls and these ramparts on top of the walls from which the defenders of that castle could hurl not only arrows and crossbow bolts, but also hot oil, burning oil, and rocks and stones and all manner of projectiles, and just hail deadly fury from above. Right? And you look at you look at those walls, and that's like how imposing that is. And on the inside, on the other side of those walls, inside of that keep, that's the safe space, right? That's the comfort zone. within those walls. So the demand for privacy and security and the beating of the chest and the demanding that the world create for us places that are hardened and defended fortresses of solitude, fortresses of comfort zones. We are imposing a desire for our own comfort and security to be able to do what we want to do in secret. So that we need not be ashamed, so that we not be exposed, so that others not know what it is that we're doing here in the dark behind the walls of our little Jericho. And companies will sell you things like VPNs, right? Virtual private networks. And now there are practical reasons for that, and there are practical reasons for technologies like firewalls and so on and so forth on your browser and on your PC and on networks. But those are of a technical nature, because there are people, bad actors, who are actively seeking to come in and steal vital, sensitive information, bank records, right? Account numbers, usernames, passwords, data on your computer, etc. Like, there are hackers who are actively trying to, just like any type of thief or burglar, they're actively trying to get inside to steal sensitive, valuable information so they can clean out your bank accounts, et cetera, right? So we have to be practical. But these are security measures. These are, yes, because we're talking about information, you could say that it's privacy related, because there is such a thing called identity theft, and that's a real phenomenon. And I'm not trying to downplay that. And I'm not saying that you should be naive and that you should throw open your home network to the world and allow anybody and everything to come into your personal computer. I'm not saying that. But we talk about those types of incursions and invasions not as incursions and invasions of privacy. We call them computer hacking. We call them computer viruses. We call them malware. And we call them DDoS attack. We call them attacks and theft. And these are the words that we use to describe that type of activity, right? That's not privacy and protection of privacy, right? Those are the protection of secrets and protection of valuable, sensitive information. Again, that has real that can have real consequences in the world, that, like, information, sensitive information that has real utility, not only to you, but to others, should they get their hands on that information. Because knowledge is power. If somebody else has your credit card information and your home address and your banking information and your personal identification, well, now they can go off into the world and pretend to be you. They can open accounts in your name, or potentially empty out the accounts that you already have. Or they can open accounts in your name and run up credit card bills in your name that get sent to your house. And all of a sudden you can receive a bill and for $100,000 on a platinum Visa card. I don't have a platinum Visa card. I didn't spend $100,000. What the hell's going on here? And you call up Visa, and Visa will say, "Oh no, you opened this account last week. Oh, you had all your identification. You had all the necessary information. We asked you a whole bunch of security questions and you were able to answer them all, so we validated your identity. Now you're on the hook for $100,000. So identity theft is real. right? So that's not what I'm talking about in terms of, quote, preserving privacy. You know what I'm talking about. And it's precisely the comfort and security of being able to have a a space where you do things and say things that would otherwise be considered untoward or inappropriate, things that you're otherwise ashamed of, but in that comfort zone, surrounded by a bastion of privacy, you partake in those behaviors. You're able to indulge those egos. And if that comfort zone is put under threat and those egos find their comfort zone under attack or under threat in any way, then they go on the offensive to shore up their garrison, to shore up the bastion, to reinforce the walls, and or to start firing catapults and arrows and crossbows at whoever is threatening their comfort zone. In other words, on that level, privacy is fear. It is whatever egos that are possessing us to give us those desires, but they know that were it to come out in the open, we might be shamed into stopping that behavior. So that particular ego, that particular habit, that particular behavior, tendency, desire, fetish, whatever it is, the ego behind that knows that it has to maintain its privacy. It has to make that a priority. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute. Earlier, you were talking about security and security and secrecy. And earlier you said how it's prudent and practical to keep secrets from the public when they want to do you harm. Now you're saying that wanting to have, things that you do that others don't accept, now you're saying that's all ego and that's all fear. So which is it? And how do you know the difference? Well, that comes down to discernment. And is it a physical or metaphysical secret, right? The behaviors. And is it supernal or infernal in nature? Is it a desire that you are wanting to preserve, or is it a secret? So the Gnostics weren't keeping their Gnosticism, their occultism, secret from the Catholic Church, from the Catholic authorities, because their egos wanted to preserve that knowledge and preserve their life, right? It wasn't like nobody indulges their Gnosticism. I don't think like that's not a thing. I mean, in some ways it is if you do so intellectually only. I mean, there's lots of people who call themselves Gnostics who aren't really, but they're indulging their fantasies about Gnosticism. They're not. So anyway, that's complicated, and it's a you can go down a messy rabbit hole with that one. But the real answer to that question, well, why is it secrecy over here and privacy over here, and why is it supernal and coming from the being over here, and why is it coming from the ego over there? Like, what's the difference? And how do you tell what if it's authentic secrecy that you need to preserve, or that if you're falsely trying to impose privacy What's the final litmus test, or is there one? Is there an easy way for us to make that discernment? Maybe I should open up the question to you. Do you guys think? What do you think might be the answer to that? Yeah, it's not an easy question, is it? And this is not an easy discussion. It's not an easy topic to face. Do you or do you not believe that we are all connected? Do you or do you not know that? When you go outside and you're all alone in the woods, maybe you're going for a hike on a path through the woods. Maybe it's your favorite trail. Maybe it's your daily walk. I do a daily walk, actually several times a day, often. And there are paths through the local woods, the local conservation area, that I take, again, almost nearly every day. Leah says, I feel we are all connected, that is, but I know nothing. So you haven't verified that 100%. But you sense it. You've heard it. You've heard people talking about how we're all one, we're all connected, and so on and so forth. But you perhaps have not experienced that and verified that through your own experience in order to be able to say, yeah, I know that for sure. And that's fair, right? We can't know before we know, right? You can't know what you don't know, and you can't know before you experience it, right? You can be told, you can be heard, you can sense it, you can feel it, you can even intuit it. But it's really when you experience it that you then go, aha, okay, this is it. Because that's what we call revelation. That's what we call illumination. And self-evident experiential knowledge, right? What we seek. That's gnosis. So as I was contemplating this whole matter of privacy, following receiving the information on Facebook and making some appointments as a result, I went for a walk in the woods. And depending on if it's really sunny or if it's really hot, right? I will like tie a bandana around my head, not only to protect my rather sensitive balding scalp from the sun, but also to keep the sweat out of my eyes or whatever the case may be. And I couldn't help but notice as I was walking through the woods, as I do every day, and I was really, I just happened to notice and paying attention to the trees, and I smiled because once again, in that moment, I was the topic of conversation between them. The trees are going, oh, here he comes again. Here he comes again with that, wearing that silly bandana. And it just hit me. It just struck me, and I stopped. I stopped and I looked around and I said, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in the forest. There's no such thing as alone in the forest. That's the most absurd assertion that anybody can make. I'm alone in the forest. Oh, I don't know. Has no one ever seen The Lord of the Rings? Right? Have we not read Tolkien? Have we not heard from the shaman and from the indigenous peoples of the world? Do we not know? Are we not aware of the so-called elemental spirits of nature? That no being, no living thing is devoid of consciousness. It just has consciousness at its own level. And the elemental spirits of those trees, you can't see them, not in the third dimension, but in the internal worlds, they're there. And they're playing and they're frolicking and they have their own little world. They have their own little society, their own little culture. But they can see you because they have physical bodies. And the reason why they can see you is because they're innocent. They're in the fourth dimension. They can enter and leave their physical body at will, which is what all innocent beings do. This is what we were able to do before we were cast out of Eden. And we were stuck, imprisoned here in the third dimension. But there's no such thing as being alone in a forest. There's no such thing as being alone on a beach. There's no such thing as being alone anywhere. Do you believe that you have a higher self? What's more is, do you know that that higher self is not an individual, but a multiplicity? The 12 individuated aspects of the being and your divine mother. And that higher self, that monad, your true self, is an individuated essence. It's a spark of the cosmic Christ. Your higher self watches everything that you do in every moment of every day. You want to take it one step further? Do you believe in karma? Do you believe that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, including on the metaphysical planes, such that if you do harm to someone now, at some point in the future, that harm is going to come back to haunt you? There will be a lesson. There will be an exchange of energy that we reap what we sow. And if you do something unto someone today, something will eventually be done unto you as a consequence of that action. That's why do unto others as you would have done unto yourself, the golden rule. Now, you either know that to be true, or at the very least, you believe that to be true, or you don't. But if you believe it to be true, that karma is real, and if you believe what I say about it, or what Samael says about it, that there are lords of karma, and that karma is intelligently managed, that it is conscious, that means the universe is watching you. The universe is conscious. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing right now, you might think that you're alone. And physically, that might be true, physically. But where is this privacy when your innermost being is watching you? Well, sorry, when the elementals in the so-called inanimate objects around you, do you have any wooden furniture around you? Do you have any stones? Do you have any crystals in your house? Anything made out of wood? Anything made out of stone? Do you have a cat or a dog or a canary? So the elementals of nature around you are watching you. Then there's the 12 independent aspects of your innermost being and your divine mother who are watching you always. They're never not watching you. And then you have, as an essence of the cosmic Christ and the lords of karma, the whole of the universe, conscious, watching and observing every move you make and calculating the impact that has on the rest of the universe in this complex, unfathomable exchange and constantly self-correcting, balancing, intelligently managed law called cause and effect, called karma. Right? And even if you believe in none of that, even if you just believe in the one monotheistic, all-seeing, all-knowing God, as a Christian or what have you, just a Jew or a Muslim, right? And you believe in Allah, God, or whatever, the all-seeing, all-knowing, omnipotent, omnipresent intelligentsia that created the universe, including you, and you believe he's always watching you, he's always looking out for you, then where's this privacy you seek so much or that you value so much? Where is it? Show it to me. Show me the place where you can go, where you can truly be alone, where no one and nothing is observing you. In other words, show me a realm in this universe, in any dimension, that is completely and totally unconscious. A room, a box, a space, a realm that you can step into and completely and totally disappear from reality itself, from God, from consciousness itself. You can escape the field of consciousness itself and be in a realm where you can exist and you can experience that is outside of consciousness, and therefore the experiences you have, the actions you take, the behaviors you indulge are completely and totally isolated and free of scrutiny. Then you will have found this precious privacy you seek. But make no mistake, that's what's required for real privacy. If you're on the path, if you're on the spiritual path, this is worthwhile contemplating. You will note that many of the people who beat their chest and drum their drum over the issue of privacy, and they demand that their privacy be respected or restored or enhanced or whatever the case may be. A lot of them they're secular. Or even if they believe in God, I don't know, shameless, is that the right word? They just don't think about it, they don't connect one-on-one. Is that I have to be, what I do in the privacy of my own home, right, is between me and my sexual partner. That's nobody else's business. Well, okay, I can grant you that, but don't think that your innermost being and your partner's innermost being isn't present and watching what you're doing. And don't think that your egos, which are also a multiplicity, aren't participating in that. And if you're doing things that you're ashamed of, that you don't want anybody else to know that you're doing, then you're almost guaranteed to be certain that there are egos behind those actions, behind those desires. And if there's egos behind your actions and desires, well, the lords of karma are watching. Karma is watching. Your innermost being is watching, and lamentably so, because you're indulging in strengthening egos in your so-called comfort zone, in your so-called safe space, and your private space, your own personal holy of holies, where no one and nothing can get to you and see what you're doing. But esoterically, metaphysically, it's simply not true. It's only true from your mortal, physical, limited, corporeal point of view. In other words, a very narrow point of view, a very narrow perspective. Privacy is a myth. There is no privacy. You know who has privacy? Demons in the deepest levels of hell have some modicum of privacy, but even they are not outside the reach of karma. The reason why they're there is precisely because they are still under the great law of karma. So even they cannot escape the law of cause and effect. They have privacy to a degree. But ultimately, there is no privacy in the universe, because privacy, in order to have real privacy, you have to be able to step out of the field of consciousness. But you can't do that. It's impossible to do that. Because if you did, you would no longer be conscious, and you could no longer experience, and you could no longer experience, let alone appreciate, your hard-won privacy, the aloneness for having stepped out of the field of privacy. But you can't experience that privacy anymore because you can't have consciousness outside of the field of consciousness. So there's no privacy. Privacy is an impossibility. It's a myth. It's a lie. It is a deception, a fabrication of ego to keep you enslaved. To keep you believing, to keep you acting in ways that you would never act, except for the fact that you believe that you're surrounded by these walls and that you're safe and secure and that nobody can see what you're up to inside the depths of your dungeon, or the solitude of your tower, your secret chamber, that you do whatever it is you do. But the universe is watching. The lords of karma are always watching. Your innermost being, your divine mother, is always watching. So where's the privacy? And as I said, there are times when it may be prudent to open up and share your secrets. Sometimes with a total stranger or a near total stranger. Now, why would you do that? That doesn't sound very smart. That doesn't sound very prudent. And yet, it has been shown that telling a complete stranger a secret that you carry that you've never told anybody else for fear of the repercussions of what they might think of you, but a complete stranger has no investment in you. Complete stranger doesn't know you. They don't have a relationship with you. They have nothing invested. They have nothing to gain nor nothing to lose. And because this is maybe a few minutes sitting next to them on a subway or a few hours sitting next to them on an airplane, it's probably the first time and the last time you will ever see them, which means who cares what they think about you? Who cares how they might judge you or not judge you? And in fact, they might finish that flight and go wherever it is they're going and then have a really interesting anecdote to share with their friends that they haven't seen in a long time that they're going to visit, and they'll share this anecdote with them over dinner and say, you know what, on my flight over here, complete strangers started opening up to me and telling me about their childhood. It's been shown that doing so, opening up those dusty, musty, cobweb infested sections, catacombs deep in our psyche, and opening up and getting things off of our chest, even if it's to a total stranger, can be tremendously cathartic. Why do you think it is that people go to therapy? Why do you think that people go and seek counselors? Therapists and counselors who are, in their own way, they've taken a vow and they've made a commitment of devotion to you. And to a lesser degree, this is true for lawyers as well, right? They're also called counsel, legal counsel, and they're bound by what's called uh, client privilege, right? Lawyer, is it attorney-client privilege? That's what it's called. What does that mean? Privilege, right? It's privileged information. Only the privileged, only those who are privy to it have the right to hear it, the right to know it. Well, that's your counsel, your legal counsel. But again, why is that kept private? Why is that kept? Because you don't want the public to know what your defense is going to be in court. You don't want the prosecuting attorney to know everything you know about the events. So you keep as much to yourself before the trial. That's what the point of a trial, the point of discovery is, to get things out in the open in front of a jury and in front of a judge. That's when the secrets come out, right? That's when the truth comes out, or at least in theory. So there's precedent for this. And in personal mental health, that safe space, that place of privilege, is between you and your counselor, you and your therapist, you and your psychologist, you and your psychiatrist, whatever the case may be. Benjamin says, if you have nothing to be ashamed of, there's no reason to insist on privacy. Still, it's interesting to note how the language we use around privacy and secrecy often echoes the idea of a maiden shielding her modesty. This is what makes privacy so personal and such a hot topic. It's so intimate, right? Because we're talking about, like we were saying earlier, about covering up our private parts, right? There's a reason why Islam covers up their women the way they do, because it's because of modesty. because of the sacredness of sexuality. That in Islam, that is so sacred that belongs you. There's something to be said about privilege, right? If you are a beautiful, voluptuous or well-toned, well-built individual, muscular, whatever. In other words, we're going to use the term very loosely here. But if you're very sexy, you're a sexy individual, you have a sexy body, a sexy appearance, and maybe even that, you feel sexy and your spouse, your partner finds you sexy. And because they're your spouse, the two of you have the privilege of seeing one another and practicing the sacred rites that relate to that quality of sexiness, of beauty, of voluptuousness, and everything that goes along with the intimate knowing of one another through the flesh. That's a privilege. No normal person allows just anybody to come into their bedchamber and do those acts with them. Right? We have a word for people like that. They're called prostitutes. And even they do it for money. Right? If you're like these crazy stunt people on the internet, that's one of the more ridiculous and absurd and disgusting things that have recently surfaced online. There's some OnlyFans internet personality who has said that she is going to have sex with as many men as she can in one 24-hour period or something like that. She wants to break the world record or something for copulation, for having the highest number of men inside of her in a 24-hour period. Well, we have a word for that. And she's not even a prostitute, although she has an OnlyFans page and therefore as an internet personality, this is garnering a lot of interest in her page and advertisers and views and all that nonsense, right? But we have a word for that. We call it a whore. We call it a slut, right? We call it whoa, was on the tip of my tongue. A nymphomaniac, right? That's a nymphomaniac who's trying to monetize her nymphomania and her internet celebrity and everything else. It's just stunt nonsense. No normal person behaves that way. Why? Because it's a privileged act. It is a sacred act. And so the covering up of women and the dressing modestly in public, that's where that comes from. It's not about oppressing women. It's about recognizing that, hey, you don't advertise to the world what belongs in the domain of privilege to your husband and husband alone. Now, we can argue over the nuances of that. And of course, and the sexual liberation in the 60s was all about that. It was all about women. And, you go to certainly Europe and most beaches are topless, and you'll see at least 50% of the women there suntanning, sunbathing, topless on the beach. And it comes to the argument, well, are breasts a sexual organ or aren't they? right? The mammary glands are there to feed babies. I mean, it's right. So uh, we can get into the weeds philosophically about all of this stuff, but the notion of privacy as it relates to modesty, there is a line there that, generally speaking, we don't want to have crossed. So we have stalls in bathrooms. We have stalls where, for those moments while you're doing your business in there, you have some modicum of privacy. Stalls in public washrooms, in other words. There's something about wanting to have some modicum of privacy when one is dealing with certain maintenance issues, bodily functions, right? Some people can't go to the bathroom, for instance, if someone's watching them. So there are men who can't use the urinals. Like, they can walk up to a urinal and they can sit there and wait, and they have to go, but it won't go if there's another man standing around or washing his hands or looking at him or waiting for him. He'll have to wait for a stall to open up, and he'll have to go, or have to wait for everybody to empty out of the bathroom. It's a real phenomenon. Is it related to fear? Most certainly. There's a discomfort that comes from being watched. There's actually, is it scope? I had it before. Scosophobia. Does that sound right? Let me just double check. Fear of being watched. Scosiophobia. Okay, no, it's scopophobia, not scope. Yeah, it's scopophobia, and that makes sense, right? Because scope is what you put on a rifle to bring things closer. It's like a scope is what snipers and what hunters use, right? On a hunting rifle. So it's scopophobia, the irrational or intense fear of being looked at, stared at, or watched by others. The fear of being watched, but it's a real fear. It is a bona fide, clinically identified phobia. So someone who can't urinate because there are people around, it's a form of scopophobia. And that's why I've got the background going that I've got that I have for, and then the on the thumbnail for today, right? It's because privacy, it's like that. It's the fear of being seen, the fear of being watched. But as I was saying, we're all being watched all the time. The lords of karma are watching us all the time, which is why it's an irrational fear. And it's an intense fear. So all of this, if you recall, I asked the question, how do you know whether your desire for privacy and your need for secrecy is legitimate? When do you know if it's coming from your higher self or if it's a desire of the ego? And the answer comes back to fear. And as I was saying, if it is a action that you are ashamed of, it's something you don't want to know, it's something you don't want others to know that you do, for fear of what they're going to think about you and what they're going to say about you and what they're going to gossip about you and what they're going to believe about you and what they might do to you. But if it's an intense and irrational fear, it's a fear that is working for some ego behind that behavior. And as I was working on the book this week, one of the F words that came up under fear is fetishize. Fetishizing. Fetishes. Now, the reason why I mention this is because many of the types of behaviors that we're talking about, where we indulge in them when we're alone, or we indulge in them when we're with, let's say, one other person in an intimate setting. And I don't have to tell you, I don't have to get into the details or the weeds of, that there's every conceivable type of fetish under the sun. People have found ways to fetishize everything. There are groups who dress up as in giant bear costumes and fuzzy animal costumes. They're called furries. And this is what turns them on. It's they fetishize being giant, cuddly, furry animals. There are people who fetishize, Dr. Pimple Popper. She now has a cable show in addition to her YouTube channel and everything. She was just a dermatologist, and she started videotaping her procedures of lancing boils and so on, and if you've ever popped a zit or you've popped a boil, there's something about it that you might have found somewhat satisfying in some way. Well, there are people who have allowed that to develop into a full-blown fetish. Now, how fetishizing relates to fear has something to do with the control and domination. And it's maybe, I don't necessarily want to get into the weeds of that here, but the point is that the fear of having the fetish exposed publicly is a clue, right? If it's something that you only do when you're alone, if it's something you do when no one else is watching, and but you indulge it, you desire to do it, it's a fetish. But you're afraid of others knowing that you're into it unless they themselves are also into it. So in secret, you might go like to a place where other people who have the same fetish go, and that's why you have these events for people who are into BDSM, and they will go, and that's why you have gay bars and so on and so forth. You have places where people go who congregate, who share the same fetish. They have these same and or vices for that matter, right? It's the same thing. Misery prefers company, and egos cause us suffering. Fetishes and fetishizing is a form of suffering, and misery prefers company. So groups, secret groups and clubs and so on will form either in person or online. And people will go and they'll practice their fetish online. That's why they want incognito mode on their browser. And that's why they don't want anybody spying on them. And they want to protect their privacy. It's fear. But that fear is working with an ego. It's intimately involved with its consort, which is lust, desire. Because fetishes always have a sexual component to them. That's what makes them fetishes. But it's like fear and lust. Benjamin says, I believe being observed by an unfamiliar entity is, in itself, a kind of violation. Take visual artists, for instance. They've long been free to push the boundaries of their imagination. But with the rise of the internet and AI capable of mimicking artistic styles, many now fear their work will simply be taken or replicated. It brings to mind the double slit experiment, where photons behave as particles only when observed, but act as waves when left unmeasured. In both cases, the presence of an observer. Okay, we'll let you finish your thought there, Benjamin. There's limits to how long you can type a comment on on StreamYard. So no, but there's a difference between being observed and having your art stolen. There is a difference there, right? But it's strange that you mentioned that, because you know that during the colonial times, the so-called Age of Discovery, when the British and the Dutch and the Spanish and the French were traveling the world, exploring the continents of Africa and Australia and South America, Central America, and North America, for that matter. When the camera was introduced, and there were many Aboriginal tribes who refused to allow their picture to be taken because they were afraid that the camera was stealing their soul. Now we know that cameras can't steal your soul. This was an irrational fear. And I don't know if there is a technical term like this, but this was an extension of scopophobia, which is, I think, what you're on about, Benjamin, when you say it brings to mind the double slit experiment, where photons behave as particles only when observed, but act as waves when left unmeasured. In both cases, the presence of a watcher fundamentally alters the outcome. Yeah, so the presence of the observer creates reality. It collapses the wave function into the world of form as we know it. But this is a function of consciousness. This is the consciousness field at work, right? This is not a violation. And when I that's why I'm bringing up the fear of being photographed. Yeah, okay. So according to Chat GPT here, because I'm able to quickly ask it things like when I want to know like simple, practical matters like, is there a term for fear of being photographed? And it says there is no clinical term, like widely recognized clinical name, but it's a real phenomenon, and it's often understood as a specific kind of social anxiety. And there are different words for it, like scopophobia is used, but also camera shyness, or you can say photophobia, or specific social phobia related to being photographed. Now, that is what was behind the Aborigines, or sorry, not just the Aboriginal peoples, not just Australian Aborigines. I mean, any native peoples from around the world who were being confronted by explorers who had brought cameras with them. Because of course they would at first they would take cameras, and the natives didn't know what they were doing. They would take pictures, but the natives didn't know. But then they would also bring the necessary chemicals and equipment and paper to develop the photos, so that they would show the natives the photos that they had taken of them. And that's when some of these natives would freak out. The medicine men or the chiefs or whatever would freak out, saying, "No, no, 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 no! You've stolen my, because you've stolen my likeness, you've stolen my soul." And that's how I'm processing what you're saying here, Benjamin, about being observed by an unfamiliar entity or in an unfamiliar way. But the fact of the matter is that we are all being observed by unfamiliar entities. We are surrounded by malevolent entities. The Sufis called them jinn. They're four-dimensional tricksters and troublemakers. And there are when we sleep, we are not only are we observed by incubi and succubi. If we have pent up, accumulated sexual energy, they will not only observe us, they will fornicate with us while we sleep, and we will have a wet dream. So our so-called privacy is violated all the time. All the time. We are all the time being watched. And we are being watched by, in the metaphysical world, we are being watched by metaphysical predators. And then there's all of our egos and all of the other demons. There are demons around. That's why Gnostics promote the practice of cleansing your house and smudging your house on a regular basis, of burning and even burning sulfur occasionally. So you light a charcoal disc, you heat it up, you put some ground sulfur on it, and you lock all the doors, you close all the windows, and you leave for several hours for the sulfur to burn, and for the sulfur smoke to do its work and reach all the corners of your house and cleanse it of all of the astral larvae, right? All of the negative remnants, the psychological aggregates that are constantly being generated and shed through the natural process of living, in a where there's so much ego activity. It's like, because every time you indulge ego, right, the ego is actually creating more egos, and as above, so below. When you consider the microbial world just for a moment, and you consider the fact that your own body is an ecosystem, and in particular your digestive system is an entire universe of microorganisms uh, creating this functional ecosystem within your entire body. Those are all individuated beings and monads. that are living inside of your body, right? That have a very intimate relationship with you. It's a symbiotic relationship you have. We even call it probiotics, right? And if tomorrow all of those bacteria decided to leave your body, you would be in a very, very tough spot. You'd be very hard pressed to digest anything. Now, if that's true for the physical world and the microbial world, how much more true is it in the metaphysical world? And as you know, in the microbial physical world, there are benign bacteria, there are probiotic or benevolent or beneficial bacteria, but then there are also malevolent, harmful, parasitic bacteria, worms, molds, and what we generally refer to as pathogens. That they're constantly trying to get into your body and they're constantly trying to exploit your physical body. We're in summer now, and you know, come July, come August, and come some heavy rain and some hot, humid weather, the mosquitoes are gonna be coming, and the black flies are gonna be on their way if they're not already here where you live. And what do? They're bloodsuckers. They're trying to get at your blood. And if that's true in the microbial world, in the insect world, in the physical plane, you have all of these entities swirling around you all the time, trying to figure out how they can get a piece of you. Why would it be any different in the metaphysical plane? It means you're always being watched and you're always trying to be exploited. And that's mechanical nature's way, because mechanical nature has to feed. And what you're describing here with the artist, right? I don't think visual artists, I think they want people to see their work. That's why they made it, right? You make a sculpture, you make a painting, you make a film, you make a TV show, you write a song, you record a song because you want people to experience your art. The AI of mimicking artistic styles and diluting the picture, it's like flooding the world with art of a certain style, now makes the original work seem less special, less privileged. But what we're really observing there is a form of mechanical nature exploiting what that artist has to give, in the same way that any pathogen or any parasite wants to come and exploit you or myself or anybody. It's mechanical nature. So AI, of course, AI is going to be exploitative, because all your egos inside of you do the same thing. They're exploiting you and exploiting your mind. They're using your mind against you, just like they're trying to use my mind against me and our bodies and our emotions. They want our consciousness and they want our sexual energy. They want to enslave our consciousness and sexual energy, and they want to siphon our sexual energy because they need to feed. But as far as the second part of this, with the law of observation, the quantum physics phenomenon, where the quantum field only collapses into reality once it is perceived, that is the consciousness field itself at work. That is real Tantra. Okay, because the field is feminine. That's Mother Nature. The field is feminine. It is the feminine receptive aspect of consciousness. That is the field, the quantum field. When it is observed, it's like shining a spotlight. That's light, but light being projected. That is the active force. That is the masculine force. The projection of light onto the field, and the field collapses. Why? Because union of positive and negative creates. It is the law of three: positive, negative, and union. Masculine, feminine, and union. That in and of itself doesn't apply to fear of being photographed or fear of being seen. Right? Because that's on the primordial level of consciousness. There's no I see why you would have an understanding or you would make the connection there, but there is no connection there other than the fact that, yeah, something's being looked at and it changes dramatically because it was observed. And so in that sense, it makes sense from the standpoint of the fear of being watched is like when you know you're being watched. You can witness this again when you're out in nature. If you ever come across a rabbit or another wild animal, and that very often the behavior of that animal changes whether or not you're looking at it. See, because if it's, let's say, a timid type animal like a rabbit or a squirrel, and it knows it's being watched, it immediately freezes, and now it's wondering whether or not it should run away and hide. And if you keep watching it, and certainly if you keep approaching it, or even if you're walking past it, if you keep watching it, your gaze is active. It is an action of you looking at it. So there is an effect. The act of you looking at it, it's in its consciousness, it's receiving your gaze. And in the reception of your gaze, that's your conscious gaze, that is an act of creation. You are connecting, you are communing intimately with that animal. You are communing with it in the field of consciousness. You are intimately creating an experience. Your gaze and its experiencing of your gaze creates the experience of it existing and you witnessing it. But because it's a wild animal and knowing when it's being watched is important to its survival, its fear kicks in. And what it creates, that experience triggers the ego of fear to come and interpret that experience of being watched. And now you can see the wheels turning in the little rabbit's head. What does this guy want? He's watching me. Is he a threat? Is he a predator? Should I be afraid of this guy watching me? And then very often, if you watch them long enough, you'll see that they'll tuck tail and run because they don't want to be watched. They don't like being watched. Because on that level, on the level of that level of consciousness, a rabbit that's being watched and knows it's being watched, it's most likely being watched by a predator. And it's instinctively that fear works for mechanical nature to ensure survival of the species. So, which is don't let things watch you. And I can only imagine what it's like for some furry rodent in a field being watched by a hawk. And we actually have that expression, right? Like watching like a hawk. You ever see birds of prey? And look at an owl, for instance, and the prominence of the eyes of an owl or any bird of prey. We have the expression like, oh, I'm going to watch him like a hawk. because, birds of prey, or any predator for that matter, their gaze is laser focused intense. So that's really like, it's a different level of violation of privacy. No, it's a violation of life. It's an act of violence. Violation and violence have the same root word. It's a predatory act for a predator to watch its prey. It's not watching its prey because it's bored. So that aspect of what you're describing is related. I just don't think that it applies to the artist and the art in AI. Not in the same way. Not in the same way, because what it the act of those AI learning models using artists' work to teach their models, and they're exploiting that. That's more of the what I was describing in terms of a parasite, right? Like a mosquito, or something that's siphoning off. It's like like a leech, right? Like we even use the word leeching. That's what these AI large language models are doing when they're stealing artists' work. They're leeching off of these artists without their consent and their without any compensation. So, but the artists there are not afraid of being seen or their work being seen. Their artists are afraid of their work being undermined, their work being exploited, and that others will be able to benefit and profit over using work that the artist did and was never compensated for. That's what the issue. That's what the artists are afraid of there, and that people will gravitate towards the artificial intelligence um, facsimile instead of going to the original art and artwork created by the artist, so that the artist will be forgotten, and then people will become obsessed with the facsimile. That's what the AI art thing is about. But I could see the relationship with the quantum field as I related it to the predator prey, because something is created when you watch or when you're being watched, and that's why when you get that funny feeling, sometimes you too. It's like, I got this feeling, like in Star Wars, right? In Empire Strikes Back, when Luke lands on Dagobah, he lands. He doesn't land. He crashes the X-wing into the swamp, and he's sitting around. He makes a little campfire, and he's sitting around in the camp, and he's recharging R2D2, and he says, I don't know, I can't shake this funny feeling, like I'm being watched. And he spins around and he points his gun, and Yoda says, "Oh, away! Put your weapon. I mean you no harm," right? Because Yoda's been watching him, and Luke can sense that. He says, "I know, I got a funny feeling about this place, like it's familiar, like I'm being watched." So we can experience that, and that's a real thing. And there are people who have a real condition called scopophobia, where they can be in a public place and they fear that feeling. It's like they've got the same fear that the rabbit has, like they're being watched, and they've got that predator prey instinct going on in them. Like at any moment now, a hawk is going to come down and grab them. But of course, it's not that. It's just that, but that if they're being watched, that's just the fear that's playing out inside of them. So that's definitely related to the gaze. Gaze has power. I mean, that's why people who are narcissists or have self-esteem issues become stand-up comedians or actors and want to get out on stage, right? They want a big audience. They want hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people watching them and adoring them, and right, because there's power in that gaze, there's energy in that gaze, in the projection of consciousness. So it's all related on that level, for sure, for sure. All right, but where does that leave us with privacy then? Right? Clearly, uh, the comfort and security that affords us with what we call privacy, that we know, we think we're alone when we're not being watched. That's a very narrow band of reality. It's 3D reality, and it's not limited to 3D reality, but from our perception, right? Because there's nobody around looking at us, so we're not being watched. We're alone, right? But as I explained, we're never alone. Metaphysically speaking, we're never alone. And esoterically speaking, spiritually speaking, we are all one. And karma is always watching us. So from the point of view of the being, there is no privacy nor need for privacy, because no privacy can exist. Because like I said, privacy could only exist outside the field of consciousness. But outside the field of consciousness, you can't have experience outside the field of consciousness. So you couldn't experience the privacy that exists there, because you need both the masculine and feminine. You need a viewer, you need an observer to be able to experience. So privacy is a myth. Privacy is a lie. It is a deception that ego uses, particularly fear and lust, in order to convince us that we are safe and that we are protected, and we are safe to partake in whatever it is that fear and lust want us to do in the comfort and privacy of our own home. So, I leave it there as a takeaway, and leave you to your private parts and what you do with them, and what you do with your private time, your alone time. Right? You're never alone. Always remember your divine mother. Always remember your innermost being is always watching. So when those secret hidden pleasures and those secret forbidden fruits that you enjoy when you think you're alone, when you think no one else is watching, now you know that you're being lied to. You're being deceived. You're being made to feel and made to think and made to believe that you're safe in your little comfort zone, in your little private chamber, away from the world, hidden from the rest of the world and from the scrutiny of family and friends and coworkers and bosses and everything, right? It's just you and whatever it is you do in those private moments. And now you know that it's all been a lie. It's all been a scam. And from the point of view of the Black Lodge, from the point of view of the negative entities that are observing you, who knows? You might be, you and your little fetish, you and your little secret behaviors might have their own channel, their own version of OnlyFans for the infernal worlds, for the demons to get together and watch you doing what you think you're doing that nobody's watching. Because there's an aspect that we didn't touch on called voyeurism. If there is, because everything has its antithesis, right? If there is a lie and a deception based on fear and control and lust called privacy, then it has its antithesis. But it's also its complement called voyeurism and the voyeuristic tendency. And what is the voyeur? And what is the fetish of voyeurism? To violate others' privacy, right? Peeping toms, and like in Blade Runner, when he goes and he's like, "Oh, I'm from the performers union, yeah, and we're looking for holes, yeah, nasty little holes in dressing rooms where you wouldn't believe what a guy'd be willing to do to get a view of a beautiful body, right? Like it's Harrison Ford is he's trying to make up an excuse for why he's in her dressing room, and he's like, "Oh, but I'm from the union here. I'm looking for holes for peeping toms looking at you while you're undressing." Right? So voyeurism, peeping toms, and voyeurism, that's a real thing. That too is a fetish. That too is a psychological thing of violating others' privacy. Looking at them when they think that they're alone and when they think they're not being seen, you taking advantage of that and you being the only one who can see what they're up to. And that we can get into a whole, kettle of worms about that. But that desire to be able to violate something that doesn't exist, privacy, that's an illusion, right? It's just a lie on top of a lie. There's no real privacy there. You're not the only one. And the thing about peeping toms and voyeurs is that they do it in secret, right? They don't want anybody to know that they're spying on someone else, right? So the voyeur has to protect their own secrecy as they're violating somebody else's privacy. They're protecting their own privacy. This is actually after today, this is going to evolve and develop into a whole chapter in the book about talking about this. And it's all based around fear and lust, indulging a desire and the forbidden fruits, right? Someone partaking in the forbidden fruit secretly while no one else is watching, and then far in the distance through a scope of some kind of a zoom lens with a camera or a video camera, someone is secretly recording what, because they're violating the privacy. So on that note, the violation of privacy, like any violation, it's an act of violence. Any sexual violation, right? It's an act of violence. It's violating someone else's comfort zone. It's indulging in something that you do not have the privilege, you do not have the permission to do, and you're not in a place of privilege. That's why the voyeur feels so powerful and feels so crafty and clever and sneaky, that they sneak a peek of the forbidden fruit while no one's watching and when nobody knows what they're getting away with. Because that's the other thing about privacy, is that nobody will know what I'm getting away with. So I put myself in a place of privilege. I'm getting something for nothing, which is of course ridiculous, because you can't get something for nothing in this universe, in a universe of cause and effect. It's like I said earlier, you can't get privacy without stepping out of the field of consciousness. You can't get something for nothing without stepping out from under the law of karma. But you cannot escape the law of cause and effect, and you cannot put yourself into a space free of the law of cause and effect and be able to get anything. Because getting something is an effect, and that requires a cause. So as you can see, the issues around privacy go far deeper and are far more expansive and comprehensive than perhaps most people give it credit for. I think most people are just stuck, again, in that very narrow mindset and a very narrow view about what privacy is and isn't. But it actually has it yields, as you witnessed, it yields an abundance of metaphysical truths and metaphysical implications, as we will find most phenomena do, and why the secular materialists who see the universe through this narrow band of physical reality and materialist neurobiological psychology, right? The brain and so on and so forth, and neurotransmitters and whatnot, and hormones and things, and just childhood traumas and conditioning and so on. Like when you look through such a narrow band, you miss the forest for the trees. And as I said, if you miss the forest for the trees, you believe you're alone in the forest, which is nonsense. You believe that you're not being watched. And as I said, trees have nothing better to do than to watch the people paying them a visit. We're always being watched. But only your fear is afraid of that. Only your fear has a problem with that. Your being doesn't have a problem with that. And scopophobia is a real psychological phenomenon, as is camera shyness or photophobia. So something to take with you into meditation, into contemplation. And next time you think you're alone, or you're thinking about indulging the things that you only indulge when you know you're alone, maybe now you'll remember that, oh, wait a minute. None of us are ever really alone. And that's where I'll leave you today with privacy, unless someone has any questions or comments to share really quick. I'll give you guys a minute or two to type away, but we've reached a 3-hour mark, and I've been trying to keep it, limited to 3 hours. I didn't think I was going to go 3 hours today, but as I said, this whole question of piracy just keeps you. It's a Pandora's box. Privacy. You start digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and just more keeps coming out, just keeps yielding more and more and more, just by digging deeper and deeper into it. I don't know if you noticed, but while you're typing, I won't replay it. I slightly altered the intro music, the introduction to the live stream. I made some alterations to it because, as much as I love the Beethoven, and I would love to have preserved the Beethoven at the beginning of live streams, the videos kept getting copyright struck, and they were getting muted in certain parts of the world, and I always get notifications on Facebook saying, "Oh, the following countries, your your video is partially muted in the following countries," and it starts listing 186 territories and countries where my video is muted. And I thought, you know what? I'm sure nobody is going to be that offended if they're not going to get 60 seconds of Beethoven at the beginning of my live stream. So I just went and I got a license for some, like generic intro type music. So hopefully that's going to solve the copyright issues with the live streams. So if you noticed anything different today, that's the intro was a little bit different. So maybe you noticed, maybe you didn't, or maybe you didn't join right on time, which is many of you shuffle in later as the live stream progresses, and that's perfectly fine. Everybody's busy. Everybody has lives. I understand that. But if you go back and watch the replay, you'll notice that the intro music is different, and the intro has a little, maybe just a little surprise in there as well. I've been working with a new piece of software because I got rid of Adobe Creative Suite. It was just costing me too much money. I couldn't justify it, so I went to different software. I'm using DaVinci Resolve now for video. So, in case you're wondering. Okay, I don't see any comments or questions, so I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming and violating my privacy today. And being all voyeuristic and watching from afar over the internet. Woo! So on that note, I want to thank you. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. To any of the Canadians on stream, like Benjamin and others, have a happy Canada Day this Tuesday. And again, I look forward to seeing you again soon. Until then, inverential peace. Take care, everyone.